Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. We've got an action-packed one tonight, and as always, I'm Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. With me tonight is Patrick Minton, who hopefully will be a mainstay this year. We're getting scheduling worked out, so say hey, Patrick.
Hey, Patrick.
Good.
Hey,
You
Dre,
can
how's it
find,
going?
yeah, good as always. You can find Patrick on Twitter as NBA Geek. And then, as always, we're produced by Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. I don't believe you can see him tonight, but just say hey so they can hear your lovely voice, Brian.
No, you can't see me tonight. We are doing a lot of stuff to get set up for the show. Maybe some new, exciting segments tonight that I'll tease. So, yeah, we'll have a lot to look forward to.
I'm looking forward to the segment.
We've got exciting segments. Yay.
We do have exciting segments. So, yeah, hopefully Patrick can come up clutch in the fourth quarter because that's what we got going.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so tonight's topics, we're going to be revisiting a few favorites at this point. So last week, I talked racism. I talked about a piece you wrote, Patrick. You're on the show, so of course you're going to follow up. And we got lots of comments, so we have some stuff to discuss there. The Cavaliers just won't stop trading. None of the trades that we've been discussing have quite finished. Teams can't even keep the players they've traded for on their team, so we're going to talk that. We love the Atlanta Hawks. Can't get enough of those. And then, as we mentioned, a segment from Patrick is going to end the show. So let's get started. Patrick, I'm actually just going to let you jump in straight here. So you wrote your post called "Let's Face It, We're All Racist." I tried to do you justice and talk about it on last week's show. Both your original post and my follow-up got tons of comments. So I'm really curious what you want to say both about the original piece and then if you have anything to say to some of kind of the responses you were seeing.
I don't want to talk too much about it because I am always nervous about when white guys talk about racism a lot. It's like I'd rather not delve into the Fox News practice of having a panel of 5 white guys talk about whether race is a problem in America. I think my only point was, and really, I mean, I think it's a lesson that everybody needs to hear. But really, my point was, to say to my fellow white people, you probably are racist. You probably are biased. And I don't mean that as a personal insult to you. And the sooner you, and by you, again, I mean all you white people out there, the sooner you basically stop getting insulted when people imply that something you said or did might have possibly been a little racist, the quicker we can all move on to solving actual problems in society that come from racial biases. And I mean, I try to come from a place of honesty by saying, yeah, I've probably got all kinds of racial biases that I don't know I have. I'd like to think I'm the type of person who hates the idea of racism. Racism to me has always been, since I was a little kid, it's always been something that I've disliked simply because it's not logical. I'm very much like, I'm practically like Spock in Star Trek. Like, I just look at racist practices and blatantly, overtly racist practices and say that's not logical, so that's not how I want the world to be. But for anyone to think that they are immune to, however many years they've had on this earth of conditioning to think racist thoughts or to have racial biases, anyone that believes they are immune to that simply because they think they are a good person, I think they're just kidding themselves. And as you pointed out, I think the first 4 or 5 comments on the article were all people who just pretty much answered. They just read an article about, hey, you're a white guy, you're probably racist, you probably don't know it, you should maybe think about it. And the first 5 comments are like, I'm not racist, but let me say something really racist right now.
And they weren't even necessarily, to be fair, they weren't even that bad, but they were I don't understand. One of the comments you just made is you said, I'm very logical. And I applaud that. But one of the things we kind of love here, we love the books Thinking Fast and Slow. I referenced one of the articles I brought up this week. I referenced Predictably Irrational, Stumbling on Happiness. Another great author is Nassim Taleb, who writes a lot about how bad we are at probability, even if we're smart people. And I think to that point, there is something to the idea that even if you're really smart, even if you're really rational, it is really, really hard to always kind of be on. And it's also really hard to know stuff. So one of the people
Yeah.
that commented was Class Handicap when we were talking about this pre-show, with a really stupid, that sounds a little mean. I'm sorry, Handicapper. It was a stupid hypothetical situation that was trying to justify profiling. But basically, the logic that they used in their hypothetical situation was just completely off. And in fact, you were saying people that know profiling, security people, basically say if the second you start being predictable in your profiling, it's easy to game your profiling. And that's why you will use like the idea of a drug mule. That's just a common system of knowing these people are less likely to be targeted. So let's give them the drugs. That's a practice that's been in place for years and years and years. So it's really hard to know the probabilities and statistics unless you're really, really up on it. And so even if you're a logical person, it's easy to fool yourself. And I notice a lot of people do that with racism where they go, I'm a logical person. I couldn't be racist. See, I thought about this thing. I'm just saying if I see a black guy versus a white girl, of course you go for the black guy. And I go, you're trying to be logical, but you're just being racist because you don't realize how hard it
Yeah,
is to be
yeah,
logical.
I yeah, you bring up a really great point, and I didn't mean to imply that I believe that my logic rules me in all areas of my life, and that somehow I am a more solid logical person than everyone. I say that I consciously strive to be logic, and whenever I consciously look at a problem, I tend to dislike things that don't or that aren't logical. I'm the type of person who whenever anybody makes a claim, I try to analyze it logically first and see if that passes the very simple Aristotelian test of, can your conclusion actually follow from your premises, and and are your premises ridiculous? And that's like that's an extremely superficial analysis of the things that might influence us in our daily lives when it comes to racial biases. And I think in all probability, I have tons of extremely illogical racial biases, precisely because I think of myself as such a logical person. Um, you know, I can't like list them right now because the whole
Yeah.
point is that there's known unknowns. That doesn't mean you know what's in those unknowns areas, but you do know that there's got to be something in there that you're not aware of and then you don't know about. And if I just look at the numbers, just the sheer incredible volume of research that has gone into not just racial but also ethnic and group biases, the idea for anyone to think, oh, but that's not me, I am immune to this phenomenon, is the height of arrogance. So I think it's just, I think it's, and one part it's me trying to be humble and say, hey, I probably got some racial biases. So, if I'm talking to you and I say something racist, you should call me out on that because maybe I'm just not aware of it. But another part of it is to just kind of yell at all the white people who keep getting pissed off at being called racist and say, you know, get over it and maybe just turn the lens back on yourself. And if somebody uh, if an African American person says to you, "Hey, that's racist," and your immediate response is not, "Oh, I'm sorry," instead of, "Oh, no, you must be wrong. I didn't mean to be racist," then you're doing it wrong. And that makes it even more likely that you are racist, right? Your first response can't be, oh no, you must have misunderstood because that's not the way I meant it. Because you are responsible for how other people understand you. It's not their responsibility to, look into your mind and know your heart of hearts. That's not their job. It's your job to convey yourself in a manner that doesn't insult vast portions of society, right?
Well, it can go both ways, but I mean, we understand this as writers. Like we've had these moments, right, where we write posts, and based on the comments or Twitter feedback, we go, "That was not what I meant at all." Like I don't understand how you guys got from what I wrote to that, but to also then you have to kind of introspect sometimes and look at your post and be like, is there a way someone could have read what I said that way? And sometimes you go, oh, this person just doesn't understand stats. They're nuts. That happens. And there are times you go, oh, I do realize the way I phrased it, but what I said did come off as saying, didn't come off the way I meant it to. And just that happens sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible to just say something the wrong way.
Yeah.
but I, yeah, I think that if most people are honest with themselves, and obviously it's very hard to be honest about this kind of thing in public, and but you probably in your daily life, and by you I mean all of you white people, all of you, and as some people point out, white people aren't the only racists in the world. Everyone has racial biases, but I can only speak from my experience as a white person. Um, I think if you really honestly take a look at your thoughts and feelings and the way you approach situations, you'll find that you exhibit racial biases. Um, it doesn't actually matter if you know them or are aware of them. You might be exhibiting them anyway. Um, I think if you asked, I think if you asked every conductor of every major symphony orchestra whether or not they were sexist, I'm sure the vast majority of them never thought they were sexist. And yet, it's just impossible to deny that the ratio of males to females in orchestras, the ratio of players of instruments has pretty much gone to 50% ever since they introduced blind auditions, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that came up in Blink.
it's
Yeah.
impossible to deny, and I'm sure many of those conductors honestly did not think they were sexist. They honestly couldn't believe that they would ever be sexist, and yet here we go. It was 70-30 for males before, and now ever since they forced you to use blind auditions, it's like 50-50. There's clearly a sexist bias in there somewhere, or there was. It would really be interesting to see if you this is a natural experiment that we can't do, but what would really be interesting to see is now take all those conductors who have been forced to realize that, oh, my practices have changed now that I can't see them, and maybe now they're aware of a sexist bias, and now if you went back to not having blind auditions, would they still stay at 50-50? I'd speculate no, but
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and
And then
the
they
same
just
thing
say,
happens.
wow, there have been a bunch of really good male, symphony players coming through. Just like it would be like, oh, this is such a weird thing. Like, this is just the biggest glut of talented male symphony players ever. I can't believe this has happened since we changed our system back. That would be funny. But anyway, on that note, I think obviously at this point, you said you don't want to talk too much, but we definitely talked a decent amount, and that's a good place. So we can head into trades unless you have any last thoughts on the matter.
I did want to talk just 2 seconds about racial profiling, and that, I mean, because you mentioned it with the drug mules, and I'm not a security expert, and I would love to hear from somebody who is. And by security expert, I mean somebody who's actually an expert and not somebody who's in charge of instituting practices in a political position. It seems to me that randomness is by far the game theoretical optimal way to choose to screen people. Because if you were to choose the profile, if you were to choose to say, Muslim men with beards or Muslim looking men with beards are the ones we're going to screen, it just doesn't seem very difficult for the affected parties to get around that sort of that bias in profiling. And to people who think, well, it'd be impossible for for a hardcore Muslim person to ever disguise themselves as a white person, I would point out, you're wrong. In fact, just today, there was a great article on Box.com about this awesome story from history about this black slave, this female black slave who passed herself off as a white man in order to escape slavery with her husband. So she pretended to be a white male, and her husband played, the role of the white male slave, and they traveled from the South all the way to Philadelphia to escape slavery. It's a great story. You should look it up. And it's like,
okay, I will.
I'm sorry, but if a black female can pass as a white male in the South in 1848, I think it was, then I'm pretty sure a Muslim of lighter skin could pass for a Caucasian male in 2014 if he chose to do so.
We talked, you brought up the symphony thing, and that was one of Gladwell's points at the end of Blink. And he also has a good article that I'll link as well, along with the slave story now, about profiling with pit bulls, and just pointed out that, profiling it has to be done intelligently, like you were saying. And I don't mean by race. I mean, like, you could look for specific things that are suspicious, right? Like, if someone's going to be smuggling, they have to have a big suitcase or something. So if you want to look for big suitcases, fine. But as soon as you start profiling on stuff that the people can just move around, that's when you run into weird territory. And that's the problem, is anytime the subject of profiling comes up, I don't see people move in that direction. They don't say, well, clearly if someone's going to try and sneak drugs through security, they're going to need a big vessel. So we're going to have to look for suitcases, jackets, etc. They say stuff like, well, you're clearly going to want to look for the ethnicity that's more likely. And that's what drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess I don't have a good connection. I don't want to besmirch any NBA players' names.
Let's just start talking about sports.
Yeah. All right. So, by the way, Brian, I guess let's just start with the Jeff Green trade and a favorite place. I don't read Sheridan Hoops, I should stress, except when people from the Wages of Wins group bring it up to me. So Brian did this to me, and this just annoyed me. Sheridan Hoops gave the Jeff Green trade, which was to get, I believe, Jeff Green for Tayshaun Prince. Quincy Pondexter went somewhere, and I think a pick was involved. I believe it's the full thing. But basically, they were saying the Grizzlies got Jeff Green, and this is fantastic for the Grizzlies. And I just don't understand. Like, we've talked about this, I think, a few weeks ago, Patrick. But the way that, freaking potential can follow someone around their whole career. Jeff Green has not been good. The best season of his career, he was almost average, and that was years ago at this point.
To be somewhat fair to Jeff Green, part of it is that his entire career, for reasons that are completely mystery to me, many coaches have asked him to play power forward, a position that he is not suited for at all. And he's not a great rebounder, and so playing power forward, he's not a great rebounder. He doesn't have, he doesn't have a lot of lower body strength and that, to defend in the post, things like that. I don't really understand why so many coaches have tried to play him at the power forward position, and that has hurt him, or it has hurt his production. Having said that, I think even if you put him at small forward, I maybe see the potential for stardom there, but I don't see I don't see any evidence that he's going to go anywhere. I mean, it's been 6 years, right? So you would think if a player is going to make that leap from I have the potential to be great to I am great, it usually happens before 6 years have passed. And it's been that long, and he's 29 now, 28, 29. And
he might be a little younger, but he's up there.
He's not that much younger. He was a junior, I think.
Did he come out late too? Wow.
Well, I mean, nowadays we consider junior late. He was at least a sophomore.
You're right. He played. Let's see. Actually, I'm looking up his college stats on Basketball Reference. You're right. He played up till he was 20 in Georgetown through a junior. So he was 21 when he started, and he is 28 this season. And he's going to turn 29 next year.
And I mean, that's not ancient, but it's also not. It's not like he's entering his prime. He's probably in the middle of his prime right now, and his prime doesn't look that great. If you look beyond the points per game column, there's not really a lot that Jeff Green does for you. And I think, most of the people listening to our podcast like to go beyond that column. At the other hand, I don't think this is going to hurt Memphis either. I mean, Quincy Pondexter wasn't the player who was moving needles very far. Tayshaun Prince was very much decidedly an average guy. I think the danger here is if Green continues to score decently, they might give him a big paycheck, because is he in the last year or second to last year of his deal?
He's got an option next year, and unless he thinks something else, I think it would just be ludicrous of him not to pick up $9.5 million next season.
Do you think? I think that if he went in the open market, he could get more than that. If you look at if you look at the crazy ass contracts people gave out last year, I think he could get 11, 12 million a year.
And actually, you're right, because a lot
Kyle Lowry got $8 million a year, or some ridiculous low sum. I mean, people are going to look at Jeff Green. They're going to see 17 points per game, and they're going to pay him. I don't think it's totally unreasonable that he might opt out, or even if he doesn't think he can get 9.5, he's going to be 29. Maybe he'd rather have 4 years at 8.5 rather than play a year at 9.5 and then have to settle for less. I think I could totally see him opting out. And so the danger here is that Memphis ends up paying him a lot more than they need to pay. I don't think in terms of the win column this year, I don't think it moves anything at all. I
Well, yeah,
don't think it
Tayshaun Prince
matters.
is pretty old, and Quincy wasn't that great. It's
Yeah,
interesting. What
and he's out for the season, isn't he? Or
is
he's
Quincy out for the season?
definitely injured. But
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the issues we have is right when as soon as you get to these, this was an interesting point that came up in the post I just put up about the value of draft picks, how we overrate them, and why, which was a fun topic. Is the reality of the NBA that people don't want to admit is you need the top 20 guys, right? You need at least one of those guys before you can even start talking contending. Nobody likes to admit that. And you get into this middle range. And as soon as you hit that middle range is where it stops not. And like to what you're saying is we may be highly critical of these midseason trades, but most of these midseason trades are shuffling deck chairs, right? They might move a win or two here or there, which could hurt you in the West, but candidly, it's just
oh,
it's
I
not
think
that
a
big of a
win or
deal.
two does matter to you a lot if you're in that spot of contention in the West. But there's always the danger that you are, especially when you're evaluating these middle tier guys. I mean, even if you don't subscribe to the advanced metrics that we advocate, you have to look yourself in the eye and ask, okay, am I really able to analyze these middle tier guys and say this guy is one win better than this guy? And what if you get it wrong and you've now lost a win? It just seems, I mean, Memphis was in great spot to make a run, and I think they should have just more or less just went with it and seen where it led. I mean, they were probably headed for a top 4 seed. I don't think this really changes that. I don't really see the need for them to. I agree with you that teams should not be reluctant to give up with draft picks to better their team, but except I don't see that this moves the needle. So I feel like they just kind of threw a draft pick away to, as you say, shuffle deck chairs, and that doesn't make sense when you're in contention because if you screwed up and you made your team one or two games worse, then that might have been the difference between a 4 seed and a 5 seed, and that's a disaster in the West.
It's interesting. That's like the classic Freakonomics podcast about soccer goalies and how we favor action above inaction, and sometimes to the detriment. Because, like, your point is, if you've got a pretty good team and you're not going to make a big move, because I mean, obviously, things like Rondo, we were behind moves like that, even if they're not looking so hot right now. They're winning in spite of Rondo, but Rondo's playing horrendously. But we're in favor of that. But you're basically saying if you've got a good team and you're looking to make basically this minor dial tweak in the middle of the season when you're in a good spot to contend, just leave it alone. Like there's no reason to, unless you get a trade you can't say no to. And none of the trades we've been discussing these last few weeks are amazing. Although I am fully behind Cleveland getting rid of Deion Waiters, except of course J.R. Smith. Hey, my cat's showing up. My cat's got tons to say about J.R. Smith. But, basically we can see very clearly they had no idea there because they are willing to let J.R. Smith do the exact same thing. And it looks like really they were just like, man, we really need a center.
Yeah, well, I think I'd be okay with the whole man, we really need a center thing, except why are they letting J.R. Smith play and take all the shots? I mean, when Waiters was on the team, I was like, I constantly berated David Blatt, and I said, I'm not going to accept you as a coach as long as you keep letting Deion Waiters take more shots per 40 minutes than Kevin Love. The same is true now. I mean, he's letting J.R. Smith shoot more shots than Kevin Love on a per minute basis, and that's insane. And recently, I think Blatt made a comment about not really believing that Kevin Love is a max player. I'm thinking you and David Kahn should get together and run a basketball team because that sounds like the most idiotic thing I've ever heard.
Didn't he backpedal and say what he meant was he thought that Kevin Love wasn't being paid the max yet? I'm trying to defend him.
It seems like the kind of gaffe interacting with the press that an NBA coach should be, able to avoid. I don't understand why, you talk to the press every day. It's a big part of your job. It shouldn't be that hard to just not throw your players under a bus like that. If that's really what you, I mean, if you look at the way he uses Kevin Love, to me, it looks like, he's using Kevin Love as if he doesn't believe Kevin Love is a max player. He's using Kevin Love as the third scoring option in the team behind Irving and LeBron James, when really Kevin Love should be the number 2 option behind LeBron James. And Kyrie Irving should be concentrating on getting Kevin Love as many shots as possible. I mean, it's like you pointed out in the pre-show, Kyrie Irving is a good shooter. He's above average for a guard, but that just means you're a little bit less efficient than any shot you can get for a good power forward, right? I mean, so it obviously Kyrie Irving shooting is better than than having Tristan Thompson shoot a mid range jumper, but that's not the choice that's being offered here. The choice is, do you create a shot for yourself, and okay, it's a good shot, or do you create an even better shot for a guy who was up until recently the best power forward in the game, and it's just
I would argue
makes no sense to me.
With maybe he was probably the second most versatile power forward next to Dirk Nowitzki, and probably the best scoring option power forward in the league. Even now, like Anthony Davis is certainly not as versatile as Kevin Love is.
Yeah, I think that equation might change, but you're right. I mean, the reason Anthony Davis is a better power forward than Kevin Love is not because of the offensive side of the ball, although he's definitely good at that too. The reason is because Anthony Davis is also, a great shot blocker and a great defender, and he gets steals and doesn't turn the ball over and lots of other great things. It doesn't foul. I mean, Anthony Davis is, for me, the best power forward in the game, but if you're talking purely on the offensive side of the ball, Kevin Love is still the best power forward in the game, unless, of course, you don't ever give him the ball, because he's not a point guard. It is not his job to bring the ball up and create scoring opportunities for himself. He's a power forward. Even the other power forwards that sort of conventional wisdom might, the believers in conventional wisdom might argue with me, and they might say, oh, LaMarcus Aldridge is the best power forward, or Blake Griffin is the best power forward. But even those guys, they don't do anything if the team doesn't get them the ball. And it seems very simple that Cleveland needs to get him the ball. I don't understand why Cleveland runs any pick and rolls where Kevin Love is not the screener. I don't understand why Cleveland has so few offensive sets that begin with feeding Kevin Love a ball in the elbow and then running some action in the corners. It doesn't make any sense the way their offensive game is right now, especially for a guy who, essentially learned the Princeton offense and is supposedly about as synonymous with the Princeton offense as you can get. I don't see very much Princeton offense going on in Cleveland. One of the tenets of Princeton offense is, there's not a lot of ball domination by the point guard. And there's also cuts, especially backdoor cuts, and not as many off-screen picks. So it's much more in favor of putting the ball in the high post and running backdoor action with the wings. And I don't see much of that happening in Cleveland. And instead, I see one or two guys dominating the ball. And if one of those guys dominating the ball is LeBron James, you kind of shrug your head and you say, okay. But if the other one dominating the ball is Kyrie Irving, it's crazy. And then to introduce another guy like J.R. Smith, who's essentially just a clone of Dion Waiters, that dominates the ball that way, it boggles my mind. I don't understand. And I get it. I get that Mike Miller's having a terrible season. Okay, I get it. I mean, and there's not a lot you can do about the fact that Mike Miller is not, he's age is showing, and he's not doing what you need, which is to really knock down threes. And I get that you don't have Kyle Korver on your roster, but it's not making it any better by giving, just because JR can shoot the ball more often does not mean it's any better than having Mike Miller in the lineup not hitting, I'd rather have Mike Miller in the lineup missing 5 shots than have J.R. Smith in there missing 15. And it's not even close.
JR's
It doesn't make any sense to me. I get it. I get that Mike Miller's not, the guy you wanted him to be, but just putting another guy in who's terrible and who takes the ball away from Kevin Love, it's not a solution. I mean, the solution to Mike Miller not being very good is to just pound it into Kevin Love constantly.
So, by the way, on that note, in terms of running the offense the right way, I don't know if you got a chance to see this. I was wicked impressed. But Coach Nick actually got an interview with Kyle Korver today, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
that was. I was going to say I'm happy you saw it already because it just came up today. I thought it was really impressive, and
okay, unless that's new, that's not just today, because there was also, is it the same one with an interview with Budenholzer in there too?
No, it's. I think it was just posted today, and he's asking Kyle Korver about it kind of reminded me of Waterboy. If you've seen the movie with Adam Sandler where they make fun of him when he's trying to explain how he plays, because I think it is fair that professional athletes, Coach Nick is used to breaking down the game and explaining things. And Kyle Korver in the interview at one point even told Coach Nick when he was asking a question, he was like, I don't know, you'd probably know better than me. Professional athletes do have that problem of you're like, ask them to explain what they're doing. And they're like, well, but it actually was really interesting because he was asking him questions about like, okay, you set the screen and what do you do? And he was saying all this stuff. So in terms of an offense that seems to be running right, clicking the right way, using people the right way, you wanted to talk the Atlanta Hawks. 2 shows ago, you mentioned your 6-1 division bet, which I mean, I put in the show notes. How do you like me now?
How you
And of
like me
course,
now?
and of course, we love Kyle Korver. So you just basically buried the Cavaliers for misusing a great player. What do you have to say about the Hawks? And actually, I would argue Kyle Korver with how well he's shooting. Why isn't I have this question for you and maybe other people in the comments can answer. Why isn't Korver shooting more? Because with how well he's shooting, that just seems.
I think the simple solution to why isn't Korver shooting more is that teams do not like to let Kyle Korver shoot. I mean, it's not like teams don't like to let Kevin Love shoot either, but Kevin Love doesn't have that same. So, I mean, when you got a guy who's shooting 50% from three and he gets the ball beyond the arc, you see defenses panic. And that's what Atlanta is very good at exploiting, and they're very lucky that Kyle Korver is a great player with a high basketball IQ because he's not, it's not just that he's a great shooter, but he's very aware of how his own shooting opens up so many opportunities for his teammates, and he's great at usually, as Coach Nick says, off the ball, but he's great at at enabling his teammates to make plays because of all the concentration he gets. On defense. I mean, when you're an opposing defense, like from the minute the last game ended, that team's prep to play the Atlanta Hawks is just do your best to not let Kyle Korver get any open looks. That is all that they do, and also they'll a big tenet is going to be try to drive him off the 3-point line because if you can force him to take a two, that's better. Even if it's a good two, it's still better than letting him shoot a three. So. And Kyle Korver he's not LeBron James. He's not a guy who goes all the way to the rim very easily. So, when there are only so many ways you can get shots for a guy like Kyle Korver. And I think Atlanta does a fantastic job of maximizing that right now. But when you have an entire defense that's trying really, really hard not to let him shoot a specific type of shot, it's going to be really hard to get him more shots of that nature.
But to your point, and actually this is what he talked about. Like this was the amazing part is like he was talking about the screen and what happens. So basically he equated himself, and I'd be curious if you like this analogy. He's like he views himself as a quarterback. He brilliantly immediately followed that up with I've never played quarterback, but he said he viewed himself as a quarterback where he's like he has to know what's going to happen ahead of time. So when he sets the screen, he's already watching the defense. So either he knows I have an open shot, I'm going to know the guy is coming at me, so I'm going to need to, pass, or they're going to give me, room and I'm going to have to push towards the hoop. But basically, he was kind of saying that where he's got all that running in his head every time he starts, and like that's how the offense goes. And it was funny. I don't know if you've seen the movie Miracle, where they have the cone headline, and they're like these weird guys that kind of, when they talk to each other about the offense, they just kind of have their own language. Kyle Korver was basically saying that with him and DeMar Carroll, where he was just kind of like, yeah, we talk to each other and we know this and this and this. So it's another interesting case where it sounds like that offense knows what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about the learning curve that an NBA point guard has to go through to learn how to play the pick and roll in the NBA. And I agree that's a very high learning curve. But to me, the hardest part of the game and especially the part that is incredibly hard to teach is to know how to read the defense when you are the screener. When you have the ball, there's certain ways you can read the defense, especially because, reading your primary defender and how he's going to play you on the screen, the decision tree is kind of small. But when you're the screener, and especially when you're doing what Korver's doing, where he'll often set 1, 2, or even 3 screens before he himself moves to free himself up to get a shot. And he's making reads, not just what is my man, the man that I'm screening, what's he doing? What's the other man doing to help? And reading those situations and knowing how he should react off the screen and how he should read that situation. That's an incredibly hard thing to teach. And I think that a lot of credit has to go to Budenholzer for realizing that this is one of Korver's big talents. This has always been one of his big talents. This is not new to Atlanta. He was great in Philadelphia at this. He was great in Chicago at this. This isn't really this. It's not like just last year Mike Budenholzer taught Kyle Korver how to set screens. He's always been really good at this. I think what Budenholzer should get credit for is, recognizing that that's one of their big strengths and maximizing that, and making it such a big part of their playbook. It's really, I think that's the kind of thing that doesn't get you all-star votes. But I mean, Korver is probably the best in the game at reading the defense on a screen.
What's amazing is because I don't think you've definitely seen interviews, but like it's amazing because the stuff you're saying, like Korver backed up in this interview with Coach Nick today, and it was great. Where, yeah, he talks a lot about being the screener and like how he thinks and what he does. And just a fun note about the Atlanta offense right now: they currently have 6 players with better true shooting percentage than Kobe Bryant's career true shooting. So that should say something. All right. So I think we've got something ready to go. We've got the last segment of the night, and we've been debating what to call it, but do we want to call it Soapboxes from Patrick's Soapbox, or do you have a preference? And we'll think if audience members have a better
ask
idea.
the audience what they want to call it. I don't know what to call this segment. This is just where I get to swear.
Okay, so Brian, we've got a little animation to go before it. So Brian, let us know if you can start that, and then when that's done, we'll let Patrick go.
Yeah, so I'm playing it right now, actually, just started, and I'm not sure if the audio is going to work, so I think you guys should kind of just start talking over it, but it's pretty funny.
All right,
so it's going now.
We were just listening to Brian explain we don't know if the audio's going, but the video's going, but basically we had a Dear Timberwolves We Need to Talk from Patrick. Patrick, you sent out a brilliant set of paragraphs in the pre-show. So I just want to let you talk to your Timberwolves right now about some of their.
Okay, they're not my Timberwolves anymore, and that's part of this rant. I gave this team up because of this kind of nonsense. So last week, the Timberwolves, Dear Flip, you released Jeff Adrian, who on a permanent basis was one of your best players, absolutely your best rebounder, also a good shot blocker, in order to sign Miroslav Radaluka because the team, quote unquote, needs height. My first reaction to this is you don't need anything other than to say, I don't know, dump all of your bad players and keep all of your good players. And newsflash, you've won 5 fucking games, so you have a lot of bad players. There's no way to get around this. You can't call this coaching. You can't call this chemistry. You've won 5 games. You have a lot of bad players. It's not really a good idea to say, hey, let's dump this promising player because we need height. You don't need height. You won 5 games. What do you need height for? And let's add to this that, Jeff Adrian might only be 6'8" in shoes, but he's got a 7'3" wingspan, and wingspan is almost always as predictive of production as height is, if not more so. So he rebounds well and he shot blocks well. In other words, he does all the things that tall people are supposed to do. So why do you need someone taller than him again? It can't be because of defense, because he's probably the Timberwolves' most hard-nosed defensive player. The team is just full of terrible players, all of which you could have sent to the D-League or gotten rid of. But the most important thing is you won 5 games. You don't need to sign anybody. There's no position of need for you. When your team is that bad, all you need to do is stockpile as many good players as you can, dump as many bad players as you can, and sort it all out later. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why the Timberwolves did this. I just had to get this rant off my chest because this is why, when we did all that research about bad teams and how they tend to stay bad, it's because you make dumbass decisions like this that you stay bad, because you never get to stockpile 7 good players because you keep dumping 1 or 2 of your good players because he doesn't, quote unquote, fit a position of need, whatever the fuck that means, when you've won 5 games.
Okay. Jeez. I like that. And what I will say is, the one thing I don't understand about the Timberwolves is how they keep lucking into talented big men. Gorgie Jang is playing out of his mind. They had Kevin Love. They had Kevin Garnett. There is some weird karma that these players, like, they've signed a pact with the devil that's, you are going to be one of the best players in the NBA, but your penance is you're going to have to play on the Timberwolves for at least 5 years or something.
Oh yeah, and then I mean, there's injury problems too, right? The Timberwolves would probably have 15 or 16 wins if Ricky Rubio and Nikola Pekovic and Kevin Martin were all playing. Rubio is a very good player, and Martin and Pekovic are at least serviceable, competent NBA players. So between the three of them, they'd probably add up to a few wins in there somewhere. But it doesn't really change the math that Flip the GM doesn't seem to understand what business this team is in right now because they're not making the playoffs. So, and I'm not advocating tanking. I'm just saying, why do you need to spend the money? Why do you need that roster spot? Not to mention, I think that Rudislav, I think he makes significantly more than it would have cost them to just guarantee Jeff Adrian for the rest of the year. So that makes no sense. My mind is boggled.
Yeah, I do. By the way, that is always funny when you see teams try and treat basketball like some bizarre chess thing where they're like, we're going to construct this perfect team. So this is who, we're going to target an X in the draft and not just good players. That kind of stuff just,
Oh, especially when your team's terrible, right? I mean, if your team's terrible, just draft the best player as often as you can and hope that they become as good as you think they're going to become. And then if you have three all-star point guards, then trade two of them for all-star wings and forwards. It's not that complicated. But you're terrible. You don't need any position because you're terrible. All you need is good basketball players. And then dumping a good basketball player to sign a guy who has been below average in his 500 NBA minutes and couldn't even wasn't even talented enough to get a spot on a European team. He had to go play in China. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's Flip.
Oh yeah, well, I'll have to start looking those up. Some of your articles on Flip that have been fun, and that remember that brief time where you and I argued, where like I actually was David Kahn, but we got in an argument about how well the Timberwolves were run, and I was like, they're not that bad, and you're like, they're worse than you think. So anyway, with that said,
yeah, I mean, I think the damning thing. I just want to say there's one more thing. The
sure.
damning thing is that there's no process, right? If there was a process that led to faulty conclusions, I could at least say, well, you're trying. But there's no process. I mean, it's run like a country club. The assistant coaching spots are all given out to guys who used to be assistant coaches or players from or his son. And I'm not saying any of those people are bad, but at their jobs, but it's quite clear that there's no process involved in finding the best people for the position. There's just a sort of a comfortableness. There's a shuckster like, mannerism where let's just go get, a guy I know. There's this guy I've known since college. He'll be a good assistant coach. There's this guy who used to play for me. He'll be a good assistant coach. There's this guy who always was my assistant coach. He'll be a good assistant coach. I mean, Randy Whitman would be on that bench if the Wizards weren't doing so well right now. So the fact that there's no process at all means that it's just whatever side Flip wakes up on of the bed this morning is the way we're going to make decisions today. And that never leads to success unless you're a genius. And I think it's kind of clear that Flip isn't a genius.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that. And yeah, adding on to, I don't want to say a slam. I think that was tough love. Maybe tough love from Patrick. That's not bad.
No, that was a slam. I was
I'm
not a fan
nice.
anymore. I'm not a fan of this team anymore, so I don't have to be nice to them. Not that I ever was when I was a fan.
All
but
right, fair enough.
I've got no skin in this game.
We usually end the show with shout outs, which is the inverse, where we say some nice stuff. I realized I didn't ask either you or Brian ahead of time to add them to the script. And I know last week, if you listen to the show, I get flustered. So I'm actually ready with shout outs. I'll start with mine. If you guys have any that you want to look up or say when you're done, we can go from that. So the first shout out I have is Lane Vashro. Today's topic.
Love Lane.
I love so today's post was basically on Friday afternoon. I started ranting about draft picks on a Friday afternoon, as I'm prone to do. He had some good questions. That actually, what I realize sometimes on Twitter is if I've got too many thoughts, if I've got 10 tweets I want to string together at someone directly, maybe I make a post. I made a post on Friday. It came out today. So thank you so much for that. And additionally, on the same post, there was just Eaton Rosen. Oh man, I'm gonna mess this up if it's Rosenberger Baum, and I don't know why I'm confusing that in my head right now. But it's future NBA GM. I apologize so much, Eaton. Let me get that up in front of me. So it is Rosenberg. So Eaton Rosenberg, he had some great thoughts immediately on this, and then Dodgson responded as well. So thank you so much for just the good comments back. This has been a great discussion. It always excites me when I talk about salary picks and draft picks or salary cap and draft picks and this, and I get good discussion as opposed to on the internet where people say, some people on the comment section did say, but well, if you want to get a superstar, you need to get a top 3 pick. And I just kind of I shrug my shoulders and go, well, whatever. So thanks so much for that. Those are my shout outs for the week. Do you have anybody to shout out, Patrick?
The only shout I want to make is to a poster on my racism article, Coxygen, who pointed us to the implicit, what's it called? The implicit
association test.
Association test, which is a test you can take online from Harvard University. I encourage everyone to take that test. I think you might be surprised at how you score on that test. It's essentially a test that will give you a good idea whether or not some of your instinctive answers to questions have a biased component to them. And thank him for pointing that out.
Nice. And then Brian, we always rib you a little, but we had some good shout outs. So if you don't have anybody, that's fine. But Brian, I'll give you the opportunity. Do you have anybody to shout out this week?
Sure, I'll shout out B-Bale Breakdown and Coach Nick. That's hard to pronounce, but yeah, I think we used maybe 3 of his video clips on the show today. So yeah, probably the best YouTube channel for the NBA on the internet, in my opinion.
Nice. And yes, those will definitely be in the write-up section, so you can check those out as well. So thanks so much. We actually, Patrick, I'm going to give us a pat on the back because normally we give ourselves a timeline, and I usually go over by 5 or 10 minutes. We actually stayed under time this week. So I'm going to give us a pat on the back for that. It was live this week, but like we mentioned last week, we forgot to tweet it out. So don't worry. Next week, we'll tweet this out. Make sure you subscribe.
Social media amateurs here.
Yeah, I know. Make sure you subscribe. As we mentioned, we're going to start hosting these through Channel Nerd Numbers. So the show is on Channel Nerd Numbers. Subscribe to that. You're already subscribed to the Boxscore Geeks RSS feed. So you're already set there. So, like us on iTunes, though, if you haven't already. And with that, we'll see you next week.